So we are still once again learning for the Menuch of Shenem Dangor Shemos Metifiori in the Eretz Chana Beit Midrash. We are learning, of course, for the Hatzlacha of all of Am Yisrael that very much need our tefillot and our Torah. I've spoken to a few soldiers who've said to me that knowing that the Torah, more in the context of my community, but knowing that the Torah is going on, knowing that the Torah is going on, the tefillah is going on, apart from the metaphysical, like the B'iluk Kadosh Baruch Hu, but to create some kind of meaning, to have some kind of sense of what we're fighting for. That we know there's some basis for this thing. There's some kind of content that's important and meaningful. That we're going out to fight the war, not just to save ourselves, which is important unto itself, but that ourselves really does stand for something. I've also heard, and there's something I was thinking about in the context. Many of these things are coming out about the division that was in Am Yisrael, the division that was in the country before, and part of the division really was about the question of what are we creating here? Are we managing something to create here in Eretz Israel? Are we managing to create something cohesive? Are we managing to create something that we know where we're going, that we understand what the content is? What are we doing here? What are we doing here? So there's a country, there is a nation, there is a land. What is it? What is it for? What is its statement? It's just another, happens to be, there's Belgium and there's France, and why not have Israel? Or is there something greater to that? And our inability to create something that really does work together, that we can really discuss, and kind of forced us to return to the basics of when the country was first established. These questions came up, but you're too busy surviving. So you're like, all right, we'll figure the questions out. Oh, okay. I guess that was that. You're sort of on you're too busy surviving to go deeper into the questions. All right, well, we'll save that for later. And I felt very much like the later came in these last couple of years when the government keeps on falling apart, when government keeps on changing, and all these rallies in the streets, etc. The questions really came up, and I don't know if we dealt with the questions well enough. And in a way, there was this shock of going back to that same place of, are we really managing to survive? Are we really managing to protect ourselves before we even go into what is so let's go back to that basic element, which is obviously not a good thing. We'd rather talk about the content. We'd rather know what we're building and not have to go back to, are we actually protecting our citizens? B'ezrat Hashem, by keeping up our Torah, by keeping our tefillah, by keeping up the content, and by focusing on having these conversations, focusing on the shalom and the achdut, we could get out of this war not only safer physically, but also with more of a feeling, more of understanding that there is what to fight for, that we stand for something, and we could stand together. B'ezrat Hashem. So says the Rambam. That's why we skipped over to Pikuach Nefesh. That's why we're going to be on this page today. Yeah.
Which number?
It's not a number because it's it's not part of the regular Merida series. It's just for the shir. I mean, I gave it a shir, the Hebrew shir as well. But it's a separate thing that's just for here. We'll start from the Rambam. The Rambam says, Osin medura l'chaya, for a woman who gave birth, afilu b'mot hachama, mipnei shehatzina kasha l'chaya, harbe b'mkomot hakol. Where it's cold, a woman just gave birth, she lost a lot of blood, she needs a fire to warm her up, and therefore you light the fire. אבל אין עושים מדורה לחולה להתחמם בו. הקיז דם ונצטנן, עושים מדורה אפילו בתקופת תמוז. So, there's some problem here. Okay. So, someone who gave blood and feels cold, you turn the fire on, even on Shabbat. When you gave birth, also lost a lot of blood. So when it comes to blood loss, you light a fire. When it comes to illness, no. Now, this is a bit strange. It's very strange, in fact. On the one hand, it sounds like when someone loses blood, so as the medical expert around this table, I'd say that if someone loses blood, you need something external to warm him up. But if it's a matter of an inner, whatever it is, fever, whatever is making him feel cold, you don't necessarily need a fire. You don't need something external to warm him up. That's how I'm reading. That's just medically. If I want to analyze why would there be a difference between someone sick who feels cold and someone who lost blood who feels cold? I don't know how medically accurate that is. Why? Oh. I'm waiting for the doctors to weigh in on this, but I understand that you're saying whatever. But before we go into that kind of medical analysis, first of all, the very need to give a medical analysis to the Rambam is already surprising, right? L'chora, when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, what you need to do is you need to ask the doctors and say, all right, what do you guys know? And Zeu, so is this like a medical? He just says, okay, in the 12th century, what we know is you need a fire, and therefore light the fire. But for another chole, right? There's something very surprising about the Rambam's need. Now, it might be the Rambam is giving random examples, but there's something surprising about this distinction between lighting a fire for someone sick as opposed to that you say you don't. In no situation, there's no situation where you light a fire for someone sick. So the other read in the Rambam is Chola she'en bo sakana, right? Someone who's not in danger. So what?
And the other two are special.
Right, and then you say the other, but that's kind of surprising because, of course, you don't light a fire for someone who's not in Pikuach Nefesh. Why would you?
What?
What? Light a fire on Shabbos? Yisur D'Oraisa, lighting fire on Shabbos. If it's Pikuach Nefesh, beseder, if it's not Pikuach Nefesh, why would you do that?
Fire is not one down.
L'halacha, no. That it's only a love and not a nasa, and not a correct, but still, l'halacha we don't say that. Does that mean that the fire is less? So we don't hold that l'halacha. You're right, but it's not. Beseder. The Rambam points that thing out.
But you say as well, and he's down it's for tipul. It's not giving to MDA.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, not giving the what?
It's not donating blood.
It's not donating. It's
Donating.
NBA. No, he said matter.
Oh, okay, that's what.
Yeah.
Matter, but
It's not. It's not like now the blood. It's not a blood drive. It's a bloodletting, right? Which is also medically. So the Ravid seems to be perplexed by the question of is it chodesh b'sakana or en b'sakana? You see that in the Ravid. בפרק יום הכיפורים, תניא בהדיא, מכמין חמין לחולה בשבת, בין להשקותו, בין להברותו. So he says, I'm a bit confused about this Rambam. Hooray, in my Gemara it says that you do light a fire and warm things up and cook for someone who's sick. So
even if it's just
again, now that's his next line. If shada b'chola she'esh bo sakanahu, and then which means the Rambam's talking about someone who's chola she'ein bo sakana, someone who's not in Pikuach Nefesh, and the Gemara is talking about someone who is. But again, it's a bit strange in the Rambam. Like, why would the Rambam need to explain that when it comes to chola she'ein bo sakana, you don't light a fire?
because you make sure the cases where you can.
Right, but the chaya, why do you in the other cases?
They're not with you college.
Because it's a middle ground. So you're saying those are middle ground.
Or maybe the woman to give birth is sakana.
Not exactly the same kind of
you-
sakana.
But I think maybe we might be looking into the emotional well-being as well, that she's in such an emotional state, there's such, raging hormones and everything else going on, such a huge experience, that she just went through that.
Despite it not being chodesh sakana, you're saying the rabbis were afraid of their wives.
My wife said it was, giving birth was a big deal,
So I heard. So I've heard. So I don't know. So they say
It didn't seem so hard from my point of view, but she seemed to think.
I heard it was a bit rough on you.
It actually was.
It's a bit strange that the Rambam brings the two cases of kin,
She was
something low, the
In between.
funny that,
מעניין, מעניין. So see what the Magid Mishnah says. The Magid Mishnah says, הייתי סבור לפרש, בחולה לדעת רבינו, אפילו יש בחולי סכנה, אין בצינה סכנה, ואפשר בבגדים. So he says two things that are both going to be of great interest to us. Number one, when you have a chole shesh bo sakana, what do? You do a lot of things, right? You have someone sick. You have a whole protocol of what to do. Now, the doctors who've worked in the hospitals, when you have a chole shesh bo sakana, do any of the protocols change on Shabbat? You're both in Shari Tzedek, right? So b'chlal, it's helpful because it's a.
what do you mean protocol?
I'm sure there's maybe it's more the nurses, unless you guys.
No,
What?
no.
You do the saying there's someone who's not someone who reaches the miyun, not someone who came to the intensive care, not intensive care, someone who's hospitalized, and you do exactly the same. Even though you know that there are certain things that you're doing for long-term care and not for the sakana.
It depends.
It's difficult, you're saying.
If somebody's recovering, isn't it a different stage from somebody?
There's someone recovering could still be besakana, right? Just because they're recovering doesn't mean they're right.
It's computers.
Sorry?
I think when they were handwritten notes, the people were more careful about things like that, like not write or writing with a you could it's a question, right? Is writing in a note part of it? It really is part of care.
Right.
But
Doctors are trained to have that terrible, atrocious handwriting for this purpose. Right?
like, so, there aren't
Again, those are difficult questions for other reasons, right? I talked to Ali Ben David, right? Ali Ben David, both of them. He's an MRI specialist, and he.
So it's Ben David Eliyahu.
Sorry, Ben David Eliyahu, yes. And he sits alone all day, he in the computer. He doesn't really see anyone. All right, in the dark room, yes, looking at screens. So they got him a katvan, but he said it really, really slows things down. He has to read it 6 times after to make sure that he actually wrote exactly what he said, because otherwise.
When I started,
Right?
What is there with that?
He said that at one point they offered him a katvan, and he asked me what to do.
Voiceover.
So this was a few years ago. I don't know. Maybe the technology's changed. I know that this was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. He asked me about this, and he said I was offered a katvan, and I tried it once just to see how it is. But now, what do you say? The problem is, he says, that there could be mistakes. The problem is that, and the other problem is it slows all the work down because we're understaffed as it is. We're always chasing. We're always behind. We're always behind because there aren't enough people reading the MRIs, not enough people interpreting the MRIs, sending out the results. So he doesn't type as fast. He doesn't know what I'm saying. Should I just what? Every
bet is a thing.
right.
Everything.
Oh, did they really?
You don't hear the difference.
Yeah.
Voila. Okay, is that all right? And he didn't go into those nuances, but I think also if he'd say them to me, I wouldn't necessarily know how to spell the words he's saying. Yeah. Okay.
You do it better.
Yeah, said it, but
Anyway.
it's okay. It's okay. It's a good week for racism this week. No, so there it's a real problem because if you're looking at on the system level. To start slowing things down for that is a real problem because you're gonna start getting too much slag and people who need the MRIs.
I think in the world it's more.
I can tell you my experience, but I don't think we need to.
All right, better. We can talk after. Anyway, so but the Magination is what? The Magination point is he says someone's besakana. Now there are many different things we do for someone besakana. Are all of them Pikuach Nefesh? I have a cholesh b'sakana. He must get antibiotics. He must get an IV of antibiotics. Must. All right. He's also running a fever. He's also feeling very, very cold, right? From his fever. Is that what's going to hurt him long term? Is that something that's going to kill him? Is that part of the Pikuach Nefesh? That's number one. Right, that's one element. What?
Same, but maybe you can't do Akmal through that part of them.
Right. So again, Akimol is less of a big deal. But again, as long as you have an IV open already. To put another, say, yeah, all right, right. If it requires more, right, exactly. If it requires more, okay, I didn't come. Right. If it requires more more Chilul Shabbat, if giving an IV, if giving alcohol through the IV will require more Chilul Shabbat, can you do it? Because he'll suffer. Again, if we're talking about suffering that could make a person lose their minds, whatever, that's one thing. But if it's
he's really talking about next thing to that deal.
right, that's the next thing. I'm getting to that.
Okay, but we don't. I don't think they're right. I mean, you don't make any law. It's an overall picture. You can't start making things like particular treatment is this or this or this or this. You have to just look at the flow, the whole patient as a whole, and not start making.
Because you wouldn't isolate. You wouldn't try to isolate this treatment with that treatment.
But this is for suffering, and this is for this. So these are whole beings, not different pieces.
right. So I think the Maggid Mishnah is exactly trying to figure that out. And the Maggid Mishnah says, if you have he says his assumption is we're talking about Cholesh Bo Sakana, otherwise the question of lighting a fire wouldn't come up. So what is this Rambam? Why is the Rambam saying don't light a fire? Because if it's Cholesh Bo Sakana, of course you light a fire. Right. If the danger is from him from being too cold.
You have an alternative.
If that's not so, there are two separate points here. One is what is exactly the sakana? Is the sakana from the cold or not? And the Rambam says the sakana could be other things that are not the cold, so I'll feel cold, but that's not the Rambam saying. When it comes to chaya, when it comes to when somebody gave birth or gave blood or bloodlet, whatever it is. Let's try to say that. In those situations, the cold really is dangerous, as opposed to someone who has a fever, so he's cold. No. That's basically that's one aspect. The other aspect is there are other solutions. You can put fleece over him. You can put other things. There are other solutions. You don't have to light a fire. That's what he proposes, but he realizes that the Ravid didn't accept this. Basically, he's saying the Ravid obviously would have thought of this, and therefore, it's in the middle of the second line. לפי שאם הוא שיש בו סכנה, משמע דלכל צרכיו מחללים. אף על פי שאין במניעת דבר שעושים לו סכנה. So the Ravid says, when it says in the Gemara in Yoma, מחמין לחולה, if it's a חולה שיש בו סכנה, you do even if it isn't necessary for the sakana. So that's part of the, I think that's what Daniel maybe was saying, Dr. Borowitz was saying, right? About exactly that.
They're agreeing.
Sorry?
Magnus and the Ravid are agreeing on this.
Yes, he's accepting the Ravid. He's saying the Ravid's read of the Gemara is if he needs a fire, you light a fire.
What's the time difference between Maggid Mishnah and Ravid?
I don't remember exactly. I think 100, 150 years. It's 100 years. It's not
Ravid's first.
Ravid's first, yes.
And they think the Rambam's saying something different. They just don't get what the Rambam's saying.
You're saying where the Rambam disappeared in all this. I think they understand the Ravid at least interprets the Rambam as Chola she'en bo sakana. The Ravid's interpretation is Chola she'en bo sakana.
And the two others.
Right, the Ravid saying I'm not arguing with the Rambam. He's talking about Chola she'en bo sakana. I'm talking about Chola she'en bo sakana. I was just pointing out there is a chidush in that. It sounds like the Rambam Bichlal would be referring to Chola she'en bo sakana, but the Ravid takes that, and the Maggid Mishnah says, well, if the Ravid said, I'm not going to argue. But this has tremendous ramifications. That's what the Magen Avraham says that about the case in the Shulchan Aruch of Chalal Cherev osim b'kol sheregilim. Kol sheregilim says the Maggid Mishnah means follow the protocol. Right? Mashma afal pi she'en bo sakana b'mniat hadavar hahu. So he says the Shulchan Aruch chose his words very precisely. He says kol sheregilim, whatever you're used to doing for that person. Now, is everything you do really to save his life? Not necessarily. right? It's not all life-saving, but it doesn't matter. Once he's in that situation, you do whatever is the normal way, the normal treatment. Now, you could take that itself in two ways. You could say, once the doctor has to start thinking about each thing, about every aspect, every element. Wait, is this just protocol or is this life-saving? Is this for the? You can't work like that. You can't work like that. Your patient's going to die if that's how you have to work on Shabbat. You can't. You definitely can't run a hospital like that. But also, if you have someone who was injured on Shabbat, and you have to start doing those cheshbonos of you have to save the person. So wait. When I do this, is this? Just do it.
Are we, according to what you're saying here, we're going according to the opinion that Shabbat is doche or not doche?
Oh, very good. So that was the other option, right? So the one option is that we're talking about a technical need, a medical requirement that the doctor will be able to just do his job. But what you're pointing out, and Barlos is pointing out that maybe the issue is different. Maybe the issue is Shabbat Hutra. That's all. Once you're dealing with Pikuach Nefesh, there's no Shabbos. There's Pikuach Nefesh. We learned last time. I showed you the Reb Chaim last time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. We talked about the Reb Chaim. Right. You said that it's not a matter of right. I'll just repeat this in one sentence. The sugya starts from you have Shabbat or Pikuach Nefesh. Which one prevails? Right. I can either keep Shabbat or save this person. Right. Which one will prevail? All right. What happens if I have a goy handy who could take care of the Pikuach Nefesh, and then both could be done? I'll save the person and keep Shabbat. That's even better, right? The Taz, and then the Reb Chaim even more strongly, says, that's not the way that you're thinking of the sugya, you're wrong. The sugya isn't, I have Shabbat, but Pikuach Nefesh Malasot, I have to somehow break Shabbat. Pikuach Nefesh is mitzvah unto itself. Saving life is mitzvah unto itself. So you should be the first to jump and do it. You should rush to do the mitzvah of keeping a person alive, right? So, why did I mention this? Something you said. Oh, yeah. So once I'm in that world of that mitzvah, what I'm doing now, I think the concept of hutra, if it's a d'chuya, so I'm saying, all right, you have Shabbat and Pikuach Nefesh, I have to save the life, but I always have Shabbat in the back of my mind, so I have to kind of cope with that balance. Of course, you have to save the person, but there's still Shabbat. D'chuya says that's d'chuya. Hutra says once Shabbat meets Pikuach Nefesh, now I'm not in the mitzvah of Shabbat, I'm in the mitzvah of Pikuach Nefesh. So that's how this Be'etzim continues from that place. So there are two ways to read the Maggid Mishnah and the Magen Avraham based on that idea. I want to prove that I want to show how. First proof, I'm going to show why I think here the issue isn't a technical one. Why the issue here is more fundamental to the idea of hutra. Yes. So let's see the Avnei Nezer. He explains the
way it sounds like like it's not a technical.
Well, where who?
Right. Yeah. It's not technical. This is all part of Havra. So it's okay to give him food. He's not saying you have to feed him, give him water. You have to hydrate him so that he will live. You have to feed him.
Right. Yeah. You have to feed him the way you would feed a patient.
Yeah.
The way you'd feed someone who's in this kind of situation. Right. To find that what exactly right. So the Avnei Nezer, I'm not the first one to say this. Avnei Nezer said this before me. Others have said this too. But I'm just giving the Avnei Nezer as an example. So Avnei Nezer in Tal Rav Magid yesh lomar da'azi l'shitato dechole sheyesh bo sakana af she'en b'mni'at hadavar hahu sakana מחללים. המגן אברהם העתיק את דבריו שאין במניעת הדבר ההוא סכנה שאפשר בבגדים. מה שמדסביר לשבת הותרה אצל חולה שיש בו סכנה. So he says, we see Maggid Mishnah and Magen Avraham hold Shabbat Hutra. It's Hutra, that means that if you're there כיוון שהותרה, אין חילוק בין איסור שיש בו מלאכה או אין בו. מותר לעשות בכל אופן שירצה. And here he's saying two separate things. Number one is, we have to realize that there are two separate issues. Number one is his being so cold a medical problem, or is it just obviously we deal with it? Is it a pikuach nefesh? L'chor, it's still a medical problem either way, but is it a danger?
And if it was, then
No, so the answer is it's not. Now, even after it's not, what am I allowed? Still, maybe I could circumvent the problem by keeping Shabbat and putting fleece on him, finding something else to warm him up with, and not necessarily turn on the heat, turn on the fire, right? So he's saying both things. Mutar lasot b'chol ofen sheyirzeh. So Rav Nezer is saying there are two issues here. Number one is you're in Pikuach Nefesh, so whatever is necessary. Now define necessary, whatever is necessary to keep you going as best possible. We don't start going into the nitty-gritty of wait, is this a medical need that's Pikuach Nefesh, or is it a general medical need that I'd fulfill otherwise? That's number one. Number two, if I could solve the problem differently, am I required to do so? The answer is no. That's what hutra means. D'chuya would mean, so the d'chuya would mean I need to do, d'chuya would mean I have to save the life, but I always have the back of my mind, I have Shabbat, so I'm going to do what's necessary for saving the life. Whatever is not for saving the life, I don't do on Shabbat. D'chuya, the hutra means I do whatever I normally do, because now I'm in the mitzvah of Pikuach Nefesh. Says the Radvaz, very amusing phrasing, the question. שאלת אם מותר לעשות לחולה שיש בו סכנה בשבת דברים שאין בהם צורך כל כך. Do you do unnecessary things for someone who's חולה שיש בו סכנה on Shabbat? Now, what do you mean by unnecessary? Well, not very necessary. It doesn't write unnecessary, not very. If not very necessary, why are you doing that on Shabbat? What are we talking about here exactly? This is the Radvaz. דבר זה מחלוקת בין הפוסקים, ואני מן המקילין. The truth is there's a מחלוקת. And I go to Kula, which, by the way, Reb Chaim points out about this, but in Kula. Kula b'Shabbat, Chumra for Pikuach Nefesh, right? So it's not Kula. אבל בדברים שיש בהם קצת צורך. אפשר שאם לא תעשה לו הדברים שיש בהם קצת צורך, יבוא לדברים שיש בהם צורך הרבה, והדבר ידוע שאפילו ספק הדוחה את השבת. The Radvaz, I wanted to show him as the other side. בעצם מחלוקת בין Radvaz and the Avnei Nezer. I know it's not very fair to juxtapose those two, but still מחלוקת just, I found them, and I think it's just interesting. The Radvaz is talking about the practical necessity. If you as a doctor are going to start, if you're in the battlefield and you start thinking inside, you have someone wounded, and you start thinking, oh, well, I didn't go another gut. You can't live like that. You can't take care of anyone like that. You're a paramedic. You have to do what's done. Also, if you're in the emergency room, right? You have to follow protocol, because you're going to start killing people. You're going to start killing your patients. If you're going to have to think about, oh, but it's also Shabbos, so should I do this? Just do it. Just do whatever protocol calls for, because you can't handle it otherwise. That's what the Radvaz says, right? He says, "Wow, but today I think I could deal with this person, right? But next time and the time after, and at some point, someone's going to die." So that's why he pulls out this fake adocher Shabbat. The fake is, even if you think you're okay with this patient right now, you can't as a system, you can't have the system work like that. The system must be a system in which you do what's necessary to save the life, and don't ask whether it's really necessary for saving the life. But it's a practical consideration. Because Avnei Nezer is not only a practical consideration. He says fundamentally, if it's not Shabbos now. Now it's Pikuach Nefesh, it's not Shabbos. You see the Rav Ovadia follows suit. Maskan Dina, source 7. Maskan Dina, חולה שיש בו סכנה שמחלין עליו את השבת, הואיל וניתנה השבת להידחות בגלל פיקוח נפש, מותר לעשות לו מלאכות, אף להקל ממחוביו ומייסוריו. כל שיש בהם קצת צורך לחולה, אף על פי שאין במניעתם שום חשש סכנה, ואין להחמיר בזה כלל. So, if you have someone sick, you have someone suffering, right? You asked about the akama, right? You want to give someone painkillers. It's not gonna kill him. It's also not a situation, right? Sometimes the painkillers are necessary so people won't lose their minds, right? Sometimes the painkillers could be, but we're not talking about this situation. Someone's suffering. Now, if it's Stam suffering, whatever. But if it's someone who's in a case, so he says in the Pikuach Nefesh situation, you just follow protocol. You don't start asking, well, wait, does he really need that? Come on, he's suffering so much. Is he? You give him what you normally give. Rav Sternbuch, what did I bring here? Says an interesting point about this, and says when I give someone the painkillers, now the body's going to fight off whatever it is, infection or whatever it is, better, right? More effectively. Is that correct? Right?
I don't think that's just opposite.
Sometimes
Because
the body
that's
just wants the oxygen.
I mean, the naturalist will say that the fever is good to, it's better to have a fever than not to have a fever.
I mean, it's not going to be good, but I think it's good.
Not a painkiller.
I'm talking a painkiller.
Bring it back to the technical.
Painkiller is, painkiller, I would agree, because it.
No. So he's saying like this. He's saying we're not talking. He's saying not because I'm saving his life, but he's saying in the long term. Right. You're right. It's somewhere in between. Right.
You're improving the way of saving.
That's right. You're improving. Now it won't improve in the short term. In the short term, we won't feel the difference, but over time, he'll improve more. If the point is, so he says, if the point is, he says his point is, even if I say d'chuya, not hutra, still, you want to write Chalalav Shabbat Achat Kedei Sheishmor Shabbatot Harbeh. The sooner he'll be able to keep Shabbatot properly. So if I give him painkillers now, he'll be able to keep Shabbat properly later on.
Saying that the medium, it's part of Pikuach Nefesh.
Right, but in the broader sense. Right, in other words, if you say, right now, am I saving this person? I'll say, no, he'll survive anyway. He'll survive anyway. He'll live, whether I give the stim or not.
I thought you were saying what was saying it increases the chance of living.
No, he's saying, let's say, well, it depends on the situation. Obviously, there's endless situations. But he's saying, let's say it doesn't, let's say he's not in imminent danger. We know that giving him the painkillers isn't going to save him or not. So he'll be fine either way. But the whole process will be better. The whole process will be, he'll be better sooner. He'll be more able to keep Torah mitzvot better if I do it this way. Because he's in that rubric of sakana, I could use that. Okay? That's as it comes to what are you allowed to do in the case of Pikuach Nefesh. Now I want to jump to something slightly different. The second aspect of if shall be v'gadim. Let's see these things in the Shema Shabbat K'ilchata. He answers three different questions. The first question is, are you allowed to do all these other things? And that's in the first seif. So let's read that for a moment in the source 8. כל דבר שאינו קשור דווקא לרפואתו של החולה המסוכן, אך יש בו צורך גדול כדי להקל עליו, או כדי לחזק ולרענן את גופו, עושים אותו בשבת, גם כאשר עשייתו כרוכה באיסור תורה, אף אם ברור שאין במניעת הדבר ההוא מן החולה המסוכן כדי להגדיל במישרין את הסכנה הנשקפת לחולה. This is mirroring of Sternbuch's psak, right? That I say, there's no difference. Again, right. So it's a question of how far do you go with this, right? Yeah. Chole who's in danger, right? Mesukan means he's in danger. Not that he's not the terrorist. I heard you guys I saw there was a lot. I didn't well, what?
The two lectures on that. Message them. They're almost the round off until we go to Shabbat. Yeah, you got to.
Bottom line.
You got to very. Some more to some more clear.
Right.
There's two bottom lines. One is to make a separate mitzvah.
They agree with that.
But if it happens that they have to come, they have to feed, and the basis for it, neither of them actually said it. But the basis of it is to save the life of Jews in the future. Right? In order to stop to be yoked against but nobody really said it, but it was inherent. They don't deserve to go. That wasn't really stated.
Oh, well,
But it was inherent.
maybe I shouldn't record this, but of course terrorists don't deserve to live. That I think by Torah.
It was inherent in the Veda. Nobody discussed it.
It's all right. All the reasons are only for us, only the practical, only the right. No, I mean, right. This is next week's parsha. This week's parsha. Yeah, this week's parsha about right shafech dam adam adam shafech and bli edim v'bli atra, right? But ed echad dayan echad v'bli edim v'bli atra, right? That's how the Gemara interprets that pasuk.
I
But
think they're real.
What are you talking about?
about where the terrorists deserve to live.
Not the way to do it, actually.
The shafech dam adam b'adam dam shafech.
It can't.
Right.
It doesn't work.
So Chazal learn that if you have a murderer, a goy, so you don't need a beit din or anything. Here's-
No, you don't do it.
But even if they have to run away to
What do you- even a Jew has we have a whole other system for.
What does that mean?
but on the way,
I think I think that's the reason.
listen, if you did it on purpose.
Oh, you're saying also a Jew the goy adam. You're saying the goy adam has that same right. Yes. Goy adam has that same right. Correct. Yes. Right. In the end, it's practical considerations like that. It's bad enough they're shooting up their own hospitals and then blaming us. Now they have to start in trouble for not treating them in our hospitals. Yep.
From the south to fall, you know, way.
Anyway, we're trying not to get too bogged down. But now comes another question, and this is a very interesting question. What happens if I need, right? This was a question Rav Shlomo Zalman was asked. The baby is sick, needs hot water, needs boiling water right now. Right now is Shabbat, and it's 3 a.m. So could you boil the water? Okay, whatever situation where the baby needs it, and we say you're allowed to boil the water, right? Elamai, my neighbors have an urn. You go knock on their door. Now, some would say they're knocking on a neighbor's door at 3 a.m. is Pikuach Nefesh, but
You need to minimize like Gaza, Shina, whatever, in order to minimize the food.
No, what
Right.
wake up the name? No, what point do you have to go
right,
crazy?
yeah, what?
What point do you have to go crazy?
Right. This has to do with the question of the alternative solutions, right? Because I have a solution to that Mechal Shabbat, but it requires I won't wake you up. I'll just break into your house and take the right. Someone in the other shir said Jean Valjean style, right? Just break into your house and take it myself, right? Is that what's necessary? By the way, there's the Rashi in Bava Kama Daf Samech who says that Pikuach Nefesh is not duche gezer, which all the Achronim like to make lamdish out of. Yeah. Right. No, so Rav Michael, I think, goes exactly to that point about that Rav Shlomo Zalman says here. I think he quotes the Rav Shlomo Zalman too. I'm happy for you to quote the Rav Michael after I read the Rav Shlomo. The Shmirat Shalai Kehilchata based on the Rav Shlomo Zalman says the following: מותר לבשל עבור חולה שבסכנה שדרוש לו אוכל חם או שתייה חמה, אף אם אצל שכנו ישנו אוכל חם ושתייה חמה. אלא שהעמדתם לרשות החולה תגרום לשכן צער וסבל גדול, גם שהשכנו ישן ויש צורך להעיר אותו, או שעלה יישאר לו אוכל ושתייה חמים בשבת. וגם אין השכן או כל אדם אחר חייבים מעיקר הדין למסור בשבת את האוכל שהכינו לעצמם, כדי למנוע בישול עבור חולה שבסכנה. אם על ידי מסירתם לחולה יישארו הם ללא אוכל חם בשבת. Now, of course, if I have an urn that's full of water, I don't want to give any away, so don't be an idiot. But if I say, look, I won't have hot water for my coffee, and that was depending on that coffee, right? I don't have enough. I'm allowed to say, yeah, but I have Pikuach Nefesh here. I say Pikuach Nefesh, so boil your own water. To boil my water on Shabbos, you have water over there. Okay, but I need it for my coffee. It's my coffee. So what do you say, Yaakov?
It does sound like his explanation is like you're not allowed to go to like it's somebody else's sphere. It's not
Right.
it's not your sphere. And I guess like you have to write that like you have Ben Adam LaMakom versus Ben Adam LaChavero, like there's sort of different spheres and you can't approach on one. I think.
Right. Now, I have to do my own halachic cheshbon. Do I have a solution? Now I say you could solve my problem. Like, yeah, but that's not part of my system. In my system, These are the
Go to
solutions
someone's
I
house,
have.
Take their blood just because you need it.
Right.
Actually acts.
As we often do. Right? But right, but this is a bigger question. Now, of course, if I have LMI, if I have the hot water, I have the boiling water, but I want to save it for my coffee for later, then I do, because that's me, right? As long as it's within my system, right?
Sure.
Right, it's my Pikuach Nefesh, exactly. It's my responsibility to take care of my child, or whatever the situation what there was, right? But I don't encroach on anyone else because they're not part of the system. So to say I have a solution from somewhere else, that's not part of the system. But then Rosh Zalman says the chidush also.
This applies to Goyim also. Like, let's say at 3 in the morning, I have a Goy Shel Shabbat handy, just like he's sleeping because it's 3 in the morning, or I've got a fellow Chayal who is Druzy, and I can inconvenience him to.
Right. So it's a good question. Let's try answering it after I show a couple more Makorot, because I think it'll help us get a better insight. Why? Mutal. Mutal. Yeah. Mutal. בסדר. No, he also says, גם אין השכן כל אדם אחר חייבים מעיקר הדין למסור בשבת. Now, of course, you can always say, you know what, I'll do without coffee, I carry on Mechal Shabbat. You're allowed to do that. But there's no chiyuv, he says. Now, here's a very interesting situation that actually happened in Yerushalayim back then. There was a case in one of the Haredi neighborhoods where the electric line, the electric wire tore on Shabbat. Now, luckily, everyone there was Haredi, so everyone was using the local, what do you call it? Generators. Yes, so they didn't need the electricity, but it's very dangerous because you have a high power generator, you have a high power wire just in the street. So what do? So that's what Shlomo Zalman what to do. So what do you say?
Written.
Sorry?
It's written.
Yes. So that's what he says here. We'll read that, then we'll see why it's controversial. As I said, there's a situation actually happened once in this time. מותר להזעיק את חברת החשמל על מנת להפסיק את הזרם. ואין חיוב מעיקר הדין לעמוד שם במשך כל השבת כדי להתרות בבני אדם לבל ייגעו בחוטים ויבואו לידי סכנה. So you call חברת חשמל, they're going to bring their cars, they're going to do their tests, whatever it is, doesn't matter, you have to save people. Now you realize in the second sentence, he knows someone is arguing with him because actually this argument actually happened. This isn't some theoretical idea. And that was Rav Yishaya Burkas, who was a big posek in Yerushalayim in the Haredi at the time, who disagreed. And he brings us in the Minchat Yerushalayim Siddur, where he has a halachot that he wrote. So he has a section of Hilchot Shabbat just in the Siddur, the good old Siddurim, where they had everything but the, right, we used to call them the train Siddurim, because they have everything except for the train schedule. Right? As a full Google in the Siddur. Right? He says, "Eini maskim im ze." אפשר להעמיד אדם שיסירו, לתלות שלט מוכן באותיות, סכנה לנגוע. אפילו ידי גוי כשהוא מיוחד לישראל, גם כן לא כדאי כשאפשר כדי says, I don't see why you'd have to make people Chal Shabbat. Have people do shmirah. Have two people stand on the two sides, right? Bring some folding tables, put them there. Have some people standing there and make sure that no one touches, and you're done. You don't need to have other people Chal Shabbat for you now, right? Once again, how far do I go with the alternative solutions? Right? Do we say, and to me it seemed very akin to the previous thing, where we say, what would you do during Chol? Here's a Pikuach Nefesh situation. What's the normal way of dealing with this or treating this? The normal way is to call Chevrat Chashmal and have them do whatever Chilul Shabbat they need to do to shut the power, to test it, whatever that they need to do. Right, and you have to do, once you're in the Pikuach Nefesh situation, you do the normal thing.
This is not a technical discussion. Because if it was a technical discussion, no rabbi, like having people there is not a safe. They could fall asleep, they could get distracted. They could.
Yeah. Obviously, we're talking about a situation where
I assume that his argument Shlomo Zalman, I mean, there's not just technical.
Right, exactly. So that's exactly, so that's exactly, so that's exactly where I was going. That's exactly where I was going. That it seems that Shlomo Zalman, they're not arguing about whether we could find people to do it, whether it's we're talking about, again, Haredi neighborhood, you have enough firm people who want to Moser their Nefesh and, well, but do whatever it takes. If people want Chilul Shabbat, we're not talking about a technical difficulty. And that's why it can't be that Shlomo Zalman is talking about, well, it's too dangerous to do that. He's talking about something more fundamental. And what he's talking about on the more fundamental level is what I want to show now. And this takes us over to the sugya of met mitzvah. Here too, you have a kohen who has a mitzvah not to be nitma, and you have another mitzvah of a met mitzvah has to be dealt with, has to be buried. So in this case also you have the right, so you have Shabbat and Pikuach Nefesh, you have the kohen and the met mitzvah. How do you deal with that? How does that work? So you see the Ritva in source 10, Berushalmi, the Masal Nazir Piresh Lehedya, the Kore ve'achrim onim oto, zeu she'kohen haba litama, Kore la'achrim levo lekovro, ve'en onim oto. לפיכך אמרה התורה שיטמא לו בעצמו. אפילו היה מוצא אנשים לקוברו בשכר, אינו צריך לזכור, אלא הוא בעצמו נטמא אם ירצה. He's allowed to hire someone else, but he's not required to hire anyone else. If he wants to hire someone else, fine, but he doesn't have to, he's not required to hire anyone else. He could just do his thing. What the normal thing, the natural thing is to bury, so that's what he'll do. Aruch HaShulchan says exactly that. Exactly that being what the Rav Michael thing. That's it. The Reb Chaim and the Rav Michael thing. Then you went off the derech. I think that's the easy way of explaining who we're talking about. I learned from him for a couple of years. But then you went off the derech. I still argue with him. We still write to each other. No, he became.
No longer fit to do that.
Right? He went. How would you define more progressive? That's not exactly even the right word. It's more
little rogue. Went rogue.
Yeah, kind of. I think he's very much. I think he's very much towing the lines. Like playing with the line between Orthodox and Reform almost. I don't know. It's not so simple. It's more. It's harder to explain. Some of his tfisot about. Yes, he doesn't conform to many of the things that I still quote. Like I still quote many of the things he says, and now he makes fun of them. Like his basic tfisot of what Talmud Torah is and things like that. He's very just it's a whole story in itself. But says Aruch HaShulchan, זה שאינו מחויב להוציא הוצאות, אף על גב דלעבור, על לא תעשה חייב להוציא כל ממונו, לבלי לעבור. Aruch HaShulchan says, I'm a bit confused. Hooray, normally, if you have a lav, and you could spend money to avoid doing an isur, so you're required to spend money to avoid doing the isur. So why is the Kohen says you could go hire someone else? I don't want to hire someone else. I want to bury myself. Fine. Why would you say that? Right? Shani hacha, שהרי אין רצונו לעבור. מצדו הלך לדרכו. ושהתורה הטילה עליו לקוברו, המוציא מכיסו. ולא זהו מה שהטילה עליו תורה. So I'm going to start from Reb Chaim, right? It's not a system where the Kohen is not allowed to nitma, but someone has to bury this body. So the Kohen says, Tov, I guess I'll have to bury the body. The Kohen says, I don't want to bury the body because I'm a Kohen. Hashem says, you're going to do it anyway. So, okay, that's my mitzvah now. So now my mitzvah is to bury the body. Say, but you could avoid it. Avoid what? Avoid the mitzvah? That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep mitzvah, right? This is a bit deeper than the Rav Shlomo Zalman, right? I'm taking this another step. It's not just a matter of I'm not required to look outside the current system that I have. All right, the Rav Michael, right, that we said before is I'm not required to look beyond the system that I have. This is my system. I could start looking for solutions on the outside, but this is the system I'm in. He's saying something deeper, which is this is the mitzvah system you're in. There's no reason to try to look for other solutions because that's your current mitzvah. That's where you are. Your current mitzvah is to bury this person.
Right? And coupled with the Torah did not tell you to
Right.
spend money now.
Right. To try to, and then malo hetila, to try to avoid. The Torah is no longer telling you try to avoid. The Torah is telling you now that's the mitzvah now. Don't try to avoid it anymore. Right. So I want to say the same thing about Pikuach Nefesh, and I want to go a drop deeper. Let's see the Ramban, the last source. Torah Adam. The Ramban wrote a book called Torah Adam. It's a very interesting book. It's basically about birth and death. So mainly death. It's what's interesting about it is that it's very theological. But then once he goes into theology, once he talks about death, he also says, by the way, there are a few halachot that pertain to death as well. Let's mention them. This is very interesting that, like, in the middle of this very philosophical, theological book, he says, since we're mentioning death anyway, I can't, right? I'd be remiss to not actually tell you what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to do. I mean, he writes a whole thing about avilut, and the whole thing about chiv gura, chiv avilut, and tumat kohanim, because it's also something that pertains to death. Lo yitama de kohen, ela lemet mitzvah o lekrovim. K'agavna lav dichuihu, dichad shmahu, v'lo mikayim hai, ela b'davar al hai. Ein kvorat met mitzvah belo tuma leolam. He says there are two separate things, and you see he goes into Hasedu Chelot Haseh, and he says when the whole Sugin Yevamot about Hasedu Chelot Haseh is referring to where I have two separate mitzvot, and they have nothing to do with each other, right? What is the common denominator between Kilaim and Tzitzit? Chora, there's no relationship between those two. Elamai, what happens if the only beged I have, if I have a beged arik nafot, that's made out of pishtan, and the only way I'd be allowed to wear it is by putting tzitzit. Now I'm required to put tzitzit on it. But I have a tzemer, so I put the tzemer on the pishtan. That happens to be, but most of us manage to go through life without having a beged that's kilaim.
You had the tuna, you wouldn't use that as an example of a Siddur.
Correct. Exactly. That's the way Hashem said to make the Bigdei Kehuna. Exactly. That's the point. The point is that most of the Ased Chalot says when it's incidentally happen to be in the same case. I have a mitzvah, or so I have an isur. Okay, so which wins? But it's incidental. Then there are situations in which it's inherent. The Rambam says, Rambam in Aseh Lamed Zayin in the Rambam is the Kohen's obligation to nitma to his relatives. And the Rambam makes it clear again. The Rambam didn't make this up, but the Rambam makes it clear. The Kohen can't say, "Well, I could stand back and allow other people to do it." No. We push him onto the met and we say, "The Torah said you have to nitma." But the Ramban says, and the Rambam continues from there and says, "This is how we know that Hashem requires us to mourn." How do I know? Where's the Torah? Where does it say in the Torah that Hashem says you have to mourn? The Rambam says here. When Hashem says to the Kohen, go become tameh, because it's your father, it's your mother, it's your brother. When the Torah says become tameh, what it's saying is don't avoid it. Take it head on. Mimele, says the Rambam, we're all obligated to also mourn in a case of mourning. This is how we know that Hashem cares about you taking the death seriously. Hashem cares about you mourning. That's what the Rambam says. That's what the Rambam says there. I want to take it back to the Ramban here. The Ramban says there are two different kinds of Ased Chalot Haseh. There's Ased Chalot Haseh that's incidental. But then there's things that are fundamental. Fundamentally, death, the obligation to bury people, will always require Tumah. Always. Now, you could get around it and get a truck that'll lift it, but the way to bury a person in a way that's Kvod Hamet is by being nitma. It's inherent. And therefore, a Kohen will have to nitma. The mitzvah of burying the dead in this case is becoming tameh. Therefore, you could hire someone else, but that would be avoiding the fundamental situation, the fundamental issue of burying through tumah. And that's why it's not two separate things. I'd have an aseh and a lot aseh tov. Maybe it's best if I could keep both. I'll pay someone else, and then I'll both remain tahor and still get the dead buried. He says, no, but the tum'ah, the met mitzvah isn't another mitzvah. It's intrinsic to the kvura. Now, why am I saying all this? You might say,
But
so,
I
Ma Kesher
want
Eleinu.
to ask if we would take a different view, that there was a time where there was a way not to get out of being Tumah. You know, at that time there was a time where you could there was a way to become tahor, but at the time where we can't, we would take a different.
So the Kohen, the thing with the Kohen is he's not allowed to go, he's not allowed to, even if he's already Tameh,
Right.
he's not allowed to become Tameh to another Met.
Right.
Right, unless it's a Met Mitzvah or a relative.
Saying it might be nowadays.
There's this parallel condition that-
Or once he's Tameh, while he's Tameh. It seems more like while he's Tameh. There's once he's Tameh to his parents, while he's walking his father to the Kvura, he could also walk on other Kvurot, because right now he's in the Tumah. Right, that's applied sometimes in interesting ways to medical school, but I won't get into that right now. Why did I want to say all this? Because what has anything to do with us? The answer is there's no Shabbat in which all of Am Yisrael keep Shabbat. There's no Shabbat, and there never will be, as far as we know, whatever. And the world will be the world has to be fundamentally different for everyone to keep Shabbat. Why? Because we'll always need doctors, we'll always need the hospital, we'll always need the army, we'll always need the police. We'll always need them. We'll never have, as far as we know, in the world that we know, so that things fundamentally change. In the world that we know, Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbat isn't another issue. It's not Tov Shabbat, and in this rare case, I meant Pikuach Nefesh. Eating treif in the case of Pikuach Nefesh happens. Sometimes you need to eat treif in the case of Pikuach Nefesh. It happens, but it's not fundamental. The world we could get on in a country in which no one will ever have to eat treif, even for case of Pikuach Nefesh. But we'll never be able to run a country that doesn't have the army, the police, the hospitals, all those things. There will always be Chilul Shabbat. Therefore, it's not two Shemot. That's why Shabbat Utra. Because the hospital has to run, anything has to be done for the sick person. We have to do because it's not, in the Ramban's words, it's Shem Echad. It's not that, it's a Hutra case. It's not, I have an Aseh and a Lot Aseh and I have to kind of juggle between them. It's the way Shabbat is kept in Am Yisrael is 90% of Am Yisrael keep Shabbat and 10% do whatever is necessary for Pikuach Nefesh. That's the way Shabbat is built in our world. That's the way Shabbat works. We have no other way that we know. We don't know of any other way of having Shabbat.
Not called Shabbat, maybe.
Exactly, and therefore, once you define it like that, it's no longer. If we said in those rare cases in which people need to mechal Shabbat, then we said, okay, there's keeping Shabbat, and you're not keeping Shabbat this time, lo nora. But if I look on at the macro level, and I say, by definition, 90% of Am Yisrael keep Shabbat, and 10% won't, because they're doing all these other things that are necessary. That's the way the system works. Mimele, it's much easier to say you're in that world, you're in that 10% who's doing whatever is necessary to keep people alive, and therefore also giving them the painkillers. All those things are in what? All those things are within that world of not keeping Shabbat. I see that from the Ramban, who say there's a difference between something that's inherently like, right, that the system is built like that, right? That's why I like the Ramban here, who says, can you bury someone without being nitma? The answer is yes, but you can't really. And therefore, once I have that, I say, so you don't have to worry about your tuma, so you don't have to hire someone. That's what you're doing. Same thing goes for the idea of the hutra of Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbat. By definition, that's the way Shabbat works. The way Shabbat works is there's that 10% who have to keep us alive.